It's another edition of Social Distancing at the Chamber. It's a segment we also sometimes refer to as Happy Hour with Hammer. My name is Garrick Taylor. We're joined, as always, by the CEO of the Arizona Chamber, Glenn Hammer. Glenn, special guest time. Why don't you introduce our special guest live from Duncan? We think you're in Washington, but we'll let Glenn do the honors.
Well, there could be no more special guest on this incredibly special day. We've got the swashbuckling and brilliant Duncan Wood, who's the director of the Wilson Center's Mexico Institute, here with us today, July 1st, 2020, the first day of enactment, date of effect for the US-Mexico-Canada agreement. Duncan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Glenn. It's great to be with you. And let's not forget it's Canada Day today as well. So a shout out to all of our Canadian friends, and let's put a U into all of our words today. And of course, this is a historic week, or a celebratory week, because it's not just USMCA's birthday, Canada's birthday, but of course, it's also going to be America's birthday this week. So I think we have a lot of cause for celebration.
Duncan, you've put a tremendous amount of time in the relationship with all three countries. I mean, you're known as an expert, certainly with Mexico, but you also understand the politics in Canada and the United States extremely well. How should we be looking at this new agreement? How does this rate with other trade agreements that the United States has signed, including the predecessor, NAFTA?
Yeah, I think it's an important question to ask because, you remember that when this thing was being negotiated, it was touch and go for a while. We didn't know if we were going to get to an agreement. And when eventually the three governments came to the final agreement, they signed it, there was a huge sigh of relief, collectively across the region from the business community, but honestly from lots of people. And this was a truly bipartisan issue. Not everybody believes that the agreement is perfect, but look at the voting in Congress on it. I mean, this is something which garnered enormous, deep bipartisan support, and that's an incredible thing. But, if we were to go back and say, what kind of agreement have we got here? How does it compare with NAFTA? Well, the fact is that it's better than not having an agreement, certainly. It is a significant advance in terms of the issues dealt with in the agreement. It's a modernization of the trading regime, trading and investment regime amongst the three North American partners. But I still worry about certain principles of trade that were weakened, diluted in the agreement. I'm a big free trader, recognizing that it doesn't hold all the answers to our development. But, I believe in the principles of free trade. And the fact that we have that non-market economy clause in the USMCA, which, is probably not going to make any difference in the long run, but it enshrines a basic principle that that we don't want to trade with countries like China. We don't want to sign free trade agreements with them. I don't like that. I don't like the fact that we have moved to much more aggressive regional content levels. I think that puts an extra burden on business. I don't like the minimum wage requirement in there. I think that, again, that looks a lot more like managed trade than free trade. But overall, I think it's a good agreement. Overall, I think it really does prepare the region for the demands of the 21st century global economy. I think it prepares the three economies, or at least it gives them the foundations of being competitive at the global level. What now we have to consider is how are each of the governments really going to do their job in terms of making sure that we have the right legislation in place, the right kind of regulations in place, and that we can work with business to take full advantage of this. And I think this is the crucial issue. A free trade agreement is a free trade agreement. It's kind of like laying down the tracks for a railroad, but the railroad is useless unless you put a train on it, and you need to have a good driver on that train as well. So what we really need to do is we've got to bring everybody together to make sure that we can push this forward.
Duncan, how about some of the new areas on digital goods and some of the updates on intellectual property, small and medium enterprises, and the de minimis standards, which we think will help on burgeoning e-commerce, particularly we're in a pandemic here, and people are getting exposed to e-commerce in a way they had not even 2 or 3 months ago.
Yeah, it was a glaring sort of absence in the existing trade regime before this, that we didn't really have harmonized rules on these things. The fact that there was such a huge gap in the de minimis standards between the United States, Canada, and Mexico. And let's face it, they're still pretty big, but at least we've moved forward on that. The fact that we really didn't have much in the NAFTA about intellectual property. The fact that we didn't really have very much in there about data and how much, or we didn't have anything about data. The NAFTA, let's not forget, was negotiated back at the end of the 1980s, the beginning of the 1990s. It reflected the business principles and the economic principles of the Uruguay round of GATT negotiations. We're really talking about history here. And so we had come to refer to it as the grandmother of free trade agreements. And now I think what we've got is we've got a very nimble, agile-looking free trade agreement. Again, let's not lie, it's not perfect, but we do have that great advantage that now we have the opportunity of changing the agreement over time. We have the ability to revisit this every 6 years. And, as you know, Glenn, one of the things that we do at the Wilson Center is we try to engage with business, government, other stakeholders as often as possible. We're launching a series of USMCA dialogues on a monthly basis, where we're bringing together people from all three countries, all different kinds of stakeholders, to try to identify problems as they emerge so that we can be better prepared for these 6-year reviews. And also to identify areas where perhaps the governments can work together, not every 6 years, but on an ongoing basis on harmonization of regulations. We need to have a North American Regulatory Cooperation Council. And of course, in the USMCA, one of the most exciting things is that idea of having a competitiveness council. So I want to begin to flesh out that as time moves on, because that's really where I think the region can move ahead.
Well, Duncan, and I'll hand it over to my partner Garrick in a moment. But you had a great forum yesterday with the great Ambassador Tony Wayne, where a big theme with leaders from Canada, Mexico, and the United States was innovation and technology. It was very forward-looking, and to me, it was very encouraging what this agreement can do if we all use the new wiring towards a positive end.
Yeah, listen, I mean, as you just said, the pandemic has moved us forward, it's accelerated the future in many ways. And, on e-commerce, of course, yes, we've learned that we really do depend on it. We're also learning that, technology of communication, such as we're using right now, are the fundamental infrastructure of our modern economic lives and social lives. So having a framework now that allows us to move forward on that is fundamental. But the other thing that I think we really need to focus on, and we didn't get to talk about it very much yesterday in the event, but is the question of human capital and workforce development. There's no doubt that our workforces, which are currently going through an incredibly painful restructuring, we need to think about retraining. We need to think about the demands of the 21st century economy. And we were already talking about these issues, but now, of course, it's urgent. Now it's critically important that we begin to focus on these things, because the millions of people who have lost their jobs, they want to come back into the workforce. They want to come back into the formal and productive economy. And the way to make that possible is to give them the skills that they're going to need to be able to take advantage of it. And we're going through interesting times in North America right now, and indeed the world, in terms of what's the future of migration. Here in the United States, we're having an impassioned debate about the future of visas for H-1B, temporary agricultural workers, etc. And we need to think about how our workforce is really prepared, and the skills that we don't have, or the skill sets that people don't want to learn. That's really where we need to bring in folks from outside. But I do believe that it is a joint responsibility of governments and of the private sector to provide those skills. Governments alone cannot do it. They can do a decent job in preparing people for basic education. But ultimately, I think we're going to have to learn from the private sector, and we're going to have to work with the private sector to prepare the workforce for the demands of that 21st century economy.
Thank you. Garrick?
Duncan, you mentioned that this agreement by free trade purists, it may not be perfect, but it's a good deal. But you mentioned that built into it is the every 6-year revisiting of this. Are you afraid that that process might inject some uncertainty into the agreement from the jump? And could we risk in 6 years free trade backsliding rather than what we hope was an update or a modernization?
So let me first of all say that the original proposal from the United States, which was that this agreement would last for 5 years and then it would lapse unless everybody agreed to keep it going, and that was a really awful option. Okay, this one, I think what we managed to do here is that the agreement comes up for renewal every 16 years, right? 16 years is a long time. It is 4 presidential administrations here in the United States. It is 2.5 presidential administrations in Mexico, and in Canada, because there's no sort of fixed term. I mean, there's 5 years, but sometimes it's less than that. We don't know. But what it does is it allows us to have a multi or cross administration approach to this. The 6-year review mechanism, I actually see as being a great advantage. Yes, it injects certain uncertainty into this, but what we have the ability to do is really to do a gut check every 6 years. I think it's better that we do it every year, to be honest with you, or even more frequently. But every 6 years, we will engage in a formal process of review. And let me just put one concrete example onto the table. I was just having a conversation with my team at the Mexico Institute before we did this recording. And we were talking about the minimum salary requirements in the USMCA. And the fact is that Mexico is unlikely to meet the $16 an hour average salary in the auto sector anytime soon. Well, in 6 years' time, we'll be able to revisit that and see where we are. And if there has been significant inflation in salaries by then, let's say that for some reason the Mexican peso has strengthened, which is unlikely at this point in time, but let's just imagine that has happened. Or if we see that Mexico has managed to move some of the higher value jobs, higher paid jobs to Mexico, the design jobs, the software jobs, etc., then we could see a situation where there'll be pressure from Canada and the United States to raise that $16 an hour up to a higher level. And that's, although, as I said earlier on, I'm not a huge fan of that. That shows you how flexible this agreement might be in the long run. And ultimately, power relations are going to be the decider of who changes the rules. But it is at least going to be a negotiated process, and a negotiated process according to rules which everybody has agreed to.
Duncan, when I look at North America, arguably the world's largest free trade bloc, and you think about some of the conflicts now going on, not just with the United States, but even with some other countries, with China, I sort of start thinking of it, and I don't mean to be derogatory to the other countries in North America, Team USA, Team China. And I'm not saying we want it to be a peaceful competition, but there's a lot of talk here in Arizona about moving supply chains from, say, Asia back here. And, for a state like Arizona, geographically, that seems to be attractive. And we see some of that happening in the advanced clean auto sector. So we just love your sort of geopolitical thoughts on those comments.
Yeah, listen, I mean, in the conversations that I'm having with the private sector right now, I hear this over and over again. And obviously it's been an issue that has been at the top of people's minds during the pandemic, as supply chains, or the vulnerabilities, frailties of supply chains, have been exposed. So the sort of the reshoring and the nearshoring phenomenon is something which plays to the benefit, to the advantage rather, of the North American region. Traditionally, or normally in my day-to-day life, the way I look at this is really how this is going to impact upon Mexico. And I see that there is a golden opportunity right now for Mexico to take advantage of this. I mean, the best thing that could have happened to Mexico is that they sign a new free trade agreement with the United States at the same time as the United States is embroiled in a deep conflict with Canada. But what is Mexico doing? Mexico is throwing that opportunity away by engaging in practices and declarations by the president, Manuel Lopez Obrador, that really are turning investors away from the country. I'm sure that everybody has heard of at least one company that said, yeah, I'd love to invest in Mexico, but now is not the time to do it. And, last week there we had the very controversial quotation from Ambassador Christopher Landau, when he said, I can't lie to my compatriots and tell them that Mexico is a good place to invest if Mexico isn't doing what is required. And I think I got that more or less right, because he's been very touchy and justifiably so about how he was quoted.
Yeah.
But that's the problem that I've seen for a long time, is that Mexico is really in such a special privileged position right now. And it needs to open up to the world. It needs to provide legal certainty. It needs to provide a regulatory and a legal framework whereby people, investors, feel that they are protected. USMCA can do part of that, but it's not going to solve the whole problem. And so, I fear that Mexico is going to miss out on this period. It's going to be a lost opportunity for the country. And the big benefits will probably come to the United States instead.
Well, we certainly want to see a win-win-win, and it's a $1.2 trillion block. It's 14 million jobs. We believe, for all the reasons you said, there's really great opportunities, and I love your comments on workforce and better integration there on the skills side. And Duncan, I just want to say, and Garrick may have a few follow-up thoughts, but I just want to thank you personally for your extraordinary leadership. You've helped provide a lot of the information that we've used in our different reports. You've been a great leader. You're a major reason we're here today. And I'm just going to say, you're going to be a major reason, and your colleagues, for why we're going to make this into something that will be incredibly beneficial for the people of all three countries. You're an extraordinary leader, Duncan. Thank you, Glenn. It's honestly, it's wonderful to have fantastic colleagues and to be able to work with such cool and fun people to work with. That's one of the best things about this job. And I'm one of these people who's a bit of a true believer. I believe in North America. I believe that the best way forward is for all of us to work together. I don't like division. I think that we've lost sight of that in recent years, particularly in domestic politics, but increasingly also in international affairs. And now is the time, I think, after a huge crisis like this, that really countries and businesses have to come together. And so I'm going to keep singing that hymn from the hymn sheet, and I know that you'll be joining me in harmony. Okay. Friends, allies, and neighbors. And Duncan, for the next time, you're always welcome in Arizona, and we'll get you back when it's safe. But I've got Don Julio Santenta, and I'm going to wait until you come back out, and we're going to enjoy it. I'm going to get into my car and begin the drive right now. Thank you.
Duncan, before we let you go, since we are celebrating the kickoff of USMCA, AMLO is going to be in Washington, D.C. in a matter of days doing the same. He's going to board a commercial flight and head to DCA. What do you think? A photo op, or are you expecting any takeaways from this?
Yeah, we've been puzzling over the reason for this visit. It's a strange one. There's all kinds of speculations out there about why he's actually coming. The official reason is that they're going to have a day dedicated to the bilateral agenda. They're going to have a day dedicated to the trilateral agenda. That's if the Canadians show up in Washington, which is far from guaranteed at this point in time. I don't really see any indication that they want to come, but maybe they will. What is the purpose? Well, one is, yes, there is a photo opportunity, and presidents like that, and particularly to be photographed at the White House and all that kind of stuff, right? Secondly, I think there is an opportunity to celebrate USMCA, although if they were going to celebrate it, wouldn't today have been the day to really do it? Okay, who am I to criticize? But thirdly, let's face it, President Lopez Obrador faces an enormous number of really deep problems at home. And there's a daily onslaught against him. So the opportunity to distract attention from the problems at home, I think, is understandable. Now the question is, how's it going to turn out? Because we have a president here in the United States who is unpredictable, to say the least. He doesn't follow the script a lot of the time. So are we going to see the friendly President Trump who, wants to put his arm around Andres Manuel? I mean, the size difference between them is quite enormous, so that's going to be amusing to watch. I doubt it, if only for the reason Andres Manuel seems to be surrounded by a number of cabinet members who have contracted COVID-19 recently, so I think that that's going to be an issue. Secondly, are the talks going to be productive in any way? they say there's a bilateral agenda. Well, they're going to talk about security, obviously. They're going to talk about migration. They're going to talk about a number of other issues there. But what's going to happen after the meeting? You remember the last time that President Trump met with a sitting Mexican president was when it was candidate Trump back in 2016. And that didn't turn out too well for President Peña Nieto. He was heavily criticized at home just for inviting candidate Trump. And then that same night, candidate Trump flew to where, of all places, Arizona, and participated in a rally or gave a rally where he slammed Mexico. And that was just, that deeply hurt the Mexicans. So will we see the nice President Trump, the friendly President Trump, which is entirely possible? Or will we see the more aggressive President Trump? Or do we see a combination of the two things, that he's nice at the meeting and then afterwards says whatever that he wants to on social media, etc.?
Duncan, you're missing the biggest question. Will both or either wear a mask?
Oh, well, no, I don't think so. I think that they may sort of remain at a socially, a safe distance from each other. But it would be kind of fun. Maybe we should make masks for them. That President Trump can wear a Mexico mask and AMLO can wear a U.S. mask. That would be interesting.
You never know. You never know.
Well, Duncan, we really appreciate you taking the time on this first day of USMCA to visit with Glenn and me on this. I will echo Glenn's thoughts that we always appreciate the leadership of the Mexico Institute at the Wilson Center. You and your colleague, Christopher Wilson, are indispensable. So thank you for taking the time again.
Thanks, Gary. It's great to see you guys, and we'll be in touch soon, okay?
Thank you.